My daughter-in-law handed me an eviction notice at my own son's funeral reception. Not in private, not with any kind of decency. She walked into the kitchen where I was standing with my brother and two of my oldest friends, and she slid a piece of paper across the counter like she was passing me a takeout menu. 30 days, she said. The estate attorney says you have 30 days to vacate the property. My son Aaron had been in the ground for exactly 4 hours. I didn't say a word. I picked up the paper, folded it once, and slid it into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. My brother looked at me like he was waiting for me to explode. I didn't. I just turned back to the window and watched the last few cars pull out of the driveway, and I thought about the first summer Aaron ever drove a tractor. He was 9 years old and terrified and so proud of himself that he didn't stop talking about it for 2 weeks. That was this property. My property. 43 acres in the hill country outside Fredericksburg, Texas. My wife Patricia and I bought it in 1987 when land out there still cost what land was supposed to cost. We built the main house ourselves mostly. I mean that literally, with our own hands and a small crew we hired from town. Patricia picked every piece of wood for the wraparound porch. She said she wanted to be able to sit outside in the evening and hear nothing but wind and the occasional coyote and feel like the world was still honest, somewhere. She died 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer, fast and merciless. Aaron took it hard in ways he never fully recovered from. He was 31 when we lost her, and after that he moved back to the property for almost 2 years before he got back on his feet. I never minded. That's what the land was for, a place to come back to. He met Christy about 6 years ago. She worked in commercial real estate in Austin, drove a car that cost more than most people's first homes, and had opinions about everything delivered in a tone that suggested disagreement was a form of stupidity. I tried. I genuinely tried. I told myself she made Aaron happy, and for a while maybe she did. They married in the spring 3 years ago. On my property, actually. Christy had originally wanted a venue in the Hill Country Wine Trail corridor, something with brand recognition, she called it, which I still don't fully understand as a thing you want from a wedding location. But Aaron wanted to get married where he grew up, and for once, she let him have that. I remember watching him walk across the back lawn toward the archway Patricia's sister had decorated with wildflowers, and I thought, that's my boy. That's the kid who couldn't parallel park until he was 22 and cried at the end of Field of Dreams every single time. That's him, grown up and happy. I should have paid more attention to her face during the vows. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in October. Aaron was driving back from San Antonio on I-10 when his truck drifted across the center line just outside of Kerrville. The highway patrol said he likely lost consciousness before impact. A brain aneurysm, they told us. Sudden, unsurvivable, and almost certainly painless. I was at the property when I got the call. I was repairing a section of fence on the east pasture, and my cell phone rang. And after that, everything is just a sequence of images I can't always put in the right order. Driving to the hospital, calling Aaron's sister in Colorado, sitting in a waiting room that smelled like floor wax and old coffee, while a doctor used the word catastrophic in the sentence about my son. He was 44 years old. The funeral was 6 days later. We had it at our church in Fredericksburg, a white limestone building that's been there since 1898, and Pastor Wendell spoke for about 20 minutes about a man he clearly loved. Afterward, we came back to the property for the reception, the way we always did for family events, the way Patricia and I had always done it. Open the house, put food out, let people stay as long as they needed to. Christy was composed the entire day, unnaturally composed in hindsight. She greeted people, accepted hugs, said the right things in the right moments. I was too exhausted and hollowed out to read anything into it. And then she handed me that piece of paper in the kitchen. I found out later from my attorney, Roy Castillo, who I'd been using for 20 years and trusted completely, that she had contacted an estate lawyer in Austin within 48 hours of Aaron's death. Before the funeral arrangements were even finalized, she had already been laying the groundwork. Here's what she understood that I hadn't fully thought through in those first terrible days. Aaron and I had never formally restructured the property ownership after Patricia died. Patricia's name came off the deed. Aaron's name went on alongside mine as co-owners, a decision we made for estate planning purposes back when Aaron was in his mid-30s, and one that had made sense at the time. What neither of us had updated since then was the specific language governing what happened to Aaron's 50% interest in the event of his death. Christy, as his surviving spouse, had a claim. Roy explained this to me on a Thursday afternoon, sitting at the small table in my kitchen with 2 cups of coffee going cold between us. He was careful and methodical, the way he always was, and he walked me through every piece of it. Her claim wasn't absolute. My 50% was untouched, and there were legal questions about the homestead exemption and my rights as the surviving co-owner, but she had enough standing to make things extremely complicated if she chose to. She was choosing to. She wants you to sell, Roy said. She doesn't want the land. She wants her half of the market value. At current prices out here, we're talking somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million for her share. I sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, the old live oak in the front yard was dropping acorns into the dry grass the way it did every fall. Patricia had hung the tire swing on that tree when Aaron was 5. The rope was long gone, but the branch was still there, the bark grown smooth and rounded where the rope had hung. "What are my options?" I asked. Roy put his pen down. "Honestly, a few. You can try to negotiate a buyout, but that's going to require either liquidating other assets or taking out a significant loan against the property, which at your age and income level may be difficult. You can dispute her claim in court, which is expensive and not guaranteed. Or," he paused, "you can buy yourself some time and do it quietly." I asked him what he meant by that. He meant this. I had more documentation than I realized. 43 years of receipts, invoices, tax filings, permits, improvement records, every fence repair, every well inspection, every cedar eradication project. All of it was in filing cabinets in the barn office, because Patricia had been meticulous about records, and I had continued what she started. Roy said that documentation of long-term primary owner investment could matter significantly in a partition proceeding, especially when the other co-owner had never invested $1 or an hour of labor into the property. He also said something else, something quieter at the end. "Ted," he said, "that's my name, Ted Harmon. Has anything about the last couple of years struck you as unusual? Financially? In terms of Aaron's decisions about the property?" I thought about that, and then I told him about the insurance policy. About 8 months before Aaron died, he had mentioned, almost in passing, that Christy had suggested they increase the life insurance coverage on both of them. "Just being responsible," he'd said. "She has a point, with the property and everything." I hadn't thought much about it. People reviewed their insurance. It's a reasonable thing to do. But Aaron had also, in the last year of his life, made 2 separate attempts to talk to me about updating the property deed. He'd brought it up once over dinner at my place and once on the phone. Both times he'd been a little vague about the specifics, said Christy thought it made sense to formalize things, said their financial advisor had recommended it. Both times I'd said we'd get Roy involved and figure it out properly, and both times the conversation had drifted and nothing had happened. I told Roy all of this. He wrote it down. Then he asked me, had I ever had any concerns about Aaron's health in the months before the accident? Had he mentioned headaches, vision problems, anything neurological? He hadn't, not to me. He'd seemed fine. He'd seemed like Aaron. A little tired sometimes, a little distracted, but 44-year-old men with demanding jobs and complicated marriages are often tired and distracted. Roy said he wasn't drawing any conclusions. He was just noting that the combination of a recently increased life insurance policy, 2 attempts to restructure the property deed, and an unexpected death in a man with no prior history of cardiovascular issues was, he used the word notable. I drove to Roy's office the next morning, and I signed a limited power of attorney that authorized him to begin gathering records. I did not tell Christy. I did not respond to her attorney's latest correspondence. I just nodded when she called to check on the timeline, said I was still sorting through some things, kept my voice calm and my sentences short. That night I sat on the porch until after midnight. It was cool for October. The kind of dry Texas cold that comes in clear and still. And I could see more stars than I usually bother to look for. I thought about what Roy had said. I thought about the last time I'd seen Aaron, 3 weeks before he died. He'd driven out on a Saturday morning, and we'd walked the fence line on the south pasture together and talked about nothing in particular, about the deer population being up this year, about whether I needed to reshingle the barn roof before winter. He'd hugged me when he left. He was a hugger, always had been, even as a teenager when his friends would have died before hugging their fathers. I thought if something was wrong, he would have told me. And then I thought, unless he didn't know. Roy called me on a Wednesday, about 3 weeks after I'd signed the paperwork. He had been in contact with the medical examiner's office in Kerr County, not officially, just asking procedural questions. And he had learned something interesting. The initial determination of death had been brain aneurysm, but the full autopsy report, which takes longer, had flagged something additional, a secondary finding. Something related to blood chemistry that the ME had noted but not yet fully explained. Roy said he wasn't a doctor and I shouldn't read too much into it yet, but he had already forwarded the information to a forensic pathologist he trusted in San Antonio, and he had also, quietly, through a contact at the Texas Department of Insurance, flagged Christie's life insurance claim for secondary review. I kept going about my days. I fed the cattle. I repaired the section of pipe that had been leaking near the stock tank. I called Aaron's sister Deborah every few days, not telling her everything, just keeping the connection going, letting her know I was okay. She'd offered to come stay with me, and I'd said not yet. I needed to be alone on this land for a while. I needed to be able to think. Christy called twice during that period to ask about the property timeline. I said I was still working with my attorney. I said these things take time. I said I understood she had her own needs to sort out. I was polite. I was even sympathetic sounding. I had spent 64 years learning that the people who stay quiet longest in a negotiation are usually the ones who end up with the better outcome. The call from Roy came on a Friday afternoon in late November. I was in the kitchen making chili, real chili. The kind with dried ancho chilies that you have to reconstitute, the recipe Patricia had gotten from her grandmother, when my phone rang and Roy said, "Ted, I need you to sit down." The forensic pathologist had found evidence of a compound in Aaron's blood work consistent with the substance that, in elevated concentrations, can cause or dramatically increase the risk of a hemorrhagic brain event. It is not something that appears in standard toxicology screens. It had been flagged only because the ME had been unusually thorough and the secondary analysis had specifically looked for it. The Texas Rangers had opened an investigation. I put the phone down on the counter and stood there for a long time with the smell of the chills in the air and the late afternoon light coming through the kitchen window the same way it had come through that window for 30 years. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about Aaron at 9 years old on that tractor. I thought about Patricia in her hospital bed, still trying to be funny even when she was scared. I thought about all the ordinary days on this land. The ones that feel unremarkable while they're happening, and then later turn out to be the days that held everything. And then I thought, she didn't count on me being stubborn. Christy was arrested on a Wednesday morning. I know, because Deborah called me before the news got out. Roy had given her a heads up. 2 rangers and a detective from the Kerr County Sheriff's Office went to the house in Austin where Christy had been staying with a friend. I wasn't there. I didn't want to be. I was out on the property, walking the east pasture in the early cold, watching the deer move through the cedar along the ridge the way they did every morning. The life insurance claim was frozen. The estate dispute was placed on hold pending the criminal investigation. Roy filed a motion to have my sole ownership of the property recognized on the basis of the circumstances, and our local probate judge, a man named Judge Ellsworth, who had known my family for 20 years, agreed to an expedited review. I won't pretend I felt triumphant. You don't feel triumphant when your son is still dead. The land is still mine, but Aaron isn't coming back to walk it with me. And some mornings that is a weight I don't know how to carry, and I just carry it anyway, because what else do you do? But here is what I know. I know that 43 acres of Texas hill country and a wraparound porch Patricia built by hand in a live oak tree, with a smooth branch where a tire swing used to be. I know that these things matter, and that some people will try to take from you what they cannot understand, and that the best revenge against that kind of person is simply to still be standing on your own land when the dust settles. I made my chili that Friday night. I ate it out on the porch in the cold with the blanket over my knees and the coyotes talking to each other somewhere out in the dark, the way they always have, the way they will long after all of us are gone. The lamb doesn't ask what you've been through, it just stays. I've thought a lot about what kept me from falling apart during those weeks after Aaron died. Not the grief. The grief was always there, underneath everything, the way cold ground is underneath even the warmest-looking field. What I mean is what kept me functional, what kept me making decisions instead of just collapsing into them. I think it came down to something my father told me when I was about 12 years old, working beside him on a fence line not so different from the one on my own property. He said, "The man who loses his head is the man who loses everything else next." I didn't fully understand it then. I do now. When Christy slid that paper across the counter at my son's reception, my first instinct was rage. Real rage. The kind that starts in your chest and moves up into your jaw. But somewhere underneath the rage was something steadier, a voice that sounded a lot like Patricia, honestly, that said, "Not yet. Think first, then move." That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. People assume age makes you slower, less capable, easier to push around. Christy made that assumption. She looked at a 64-year-old man standing at his son's kitchen counter, and she saw someone who could be managed. What she didn't see was 40 years of running a working property, 40 years of solving problems before they became disasters, 40 years of learning that the loudest person in a room is almost never the most dangerous one. I wasn't loud. I was careful. And careful turned out to matter more than anything else. I've also thought about Roy, what he did, the way he worked, the way he asked the right questions without ever making me feel like I was being handled. He is a man of genuine integrity, and I don't use that word casually. Integrity isn't just about being honest. It's about doing the right thing even when doing nothing would be easier, even when nobody would blame you for walking away. Roy didn't have to dig. He chose to. That choice changed everything. And Deborah, Aaron's sister, my daughter, called me almost every other day through all of it, never pushing, never prying, just making sure I knew she was there. That's its own kind of courage, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't ask for recognition. She held on too. We held on together. What happened to Christy was not luck, and it was not fate. It was consequence. She made a series of choices, each one built on the assumption that she was smarter than the people around her and that patience was a weakness she didn't need to worry about. She was wrong on both counts. The choices she made created the outcomes she received. That's not philosophy. That's just how things work when you look at them honestly, without needing a larger story to explain them. What I keep coming back to is this: Aaron deserved better. He deserved a longer life and a marriage built on something real. I can't fix that. I couldn't protect him from something I didn't know was coming, and I've had to make a kind of peace with that, the imperfect kind that doesn't fully resolve, but at least lets you keep going. What I could do, what I did, was refuse to let his land go without a fight, refuse to be rushed, refuse to sign anything that didn't feel right. That stubbornness, which Patricia always called my least charming quality, turned out to be worth something after all. The live oak in the front yard is still there. The porch is still there. The east pasture, the south fence line, the stock tank, the barn with the filing cabinets full of 40 years of careful record-keeping. All of it's still here. Aaron grew up on this land. Part of him is still in it, I think. The way a person leaves something of themselves in the places they truly loved. I'm still here, too.